The goal of a sequel, in most cases, should be to iterate on everything that the first game introduced. If the first entry was successful, then it only makes sense to push everything just a bit further. Take the lessons that you learned, apply them, and give the audience more of what they loved the first time around. Borderlands 2 might be the ultimate example of this. It does everything that the first game did, but it does it better and larger. Where the first game was an interesting mash of genres, a concoction blended together that the gaming market didn't know they always wanted, the second game is that concoction refined. The loot systems and gameplay are given more room to breathe. Characters and classes feel more distinct. Weapons feel unique and robust. Enemy variety is massively increased, with some varieties of foe feeling like an actual challenge. The environments have left the drab, light brown backgrounds of the wastelands in the past. We now get areas of frost, fire, industry, and more. The story, instead of just being a vague collection of missions aimed at getting to the vault, contains layered characters with interesting motivations. A complex dynamic full of new and interesting people interacting on a large stage with massive stakes. The humor is refined to the point that I was actually along for the ride, and that's saying a lot as someone who isn't particularly interested in this brand of humor. But there are jokes in this game that are just straight up well crafted. The endgame is incredibly addicting. After the game is over, you just want to play it again and again. Farming for loot is fun and satisfying. Crafting builds is a worthwhile task that rewards you with a boost of dopamine that you've been chasing throughout the entire game. Borderlands 2 is one of those incredibly well-crafted titles that just has almost everything going for it. I wouldn't call it perfect. It has some bad pacing at points. There are a ton of moments where the humor doesn't land, and of course the affliction that infects the entire Borderlands series. Its tone hasn't exactly survived the cultural progression of the last 13 years. Despite all that, you can't deny the fact that Borderlands 2 is just a damn fun time. Its systems work well together. It's a game that begs for you to keep playing. That begging doesn't come directly, but indirectly through its systems. You feel that these systems are worth more of your time, so you want to invest back into it. So that's what I'm going to be talking about today. I'll be reviewing Borderlands 2 and talking about gameplay, mechanics, story, and every handsome jack in between. If you haven't seen my previous video on the first Borderlands game, I'd highly recommend checking it out. If you enjoy the video and you want to support the channel, like it and subscribe, as it really helps me out. You can also support the channel further over on the Patreon, where I upload exclusive media reports and video game adaptation movie reviews. Hey Dad, it's me, your favorite son, and today I'd like to talk about Borderlands 2. Development on Borderlands 2 began almost immediately after the success of the first game. Of course, Gearbox supported the first game with DLC and content updates long after its release, but since the series was so incredibly successful, it was clear that a sequel was in order. And the team had learned a lot of lessons on the first game that they planned to take with them. The largest lesson was that their 11th hour art direction change actually worked, that people were really interested in this art style and wanted to see it taken further. So that's exactly what Gearbox decided to do. This meant expanding environments, introducing more color to the world, while at the same time keeping everything that worked. They knew what people liked about the game, its loot systems, the feedback those mechanics provided, and the general style. Outside of that, they rehauled everything that didn't work. New character classes were introduced and made even more distinct so that they didn't overlap like the first game. Skill trees were expanded, weapon manufacturers were more fleshed out, guns themselves got a visual overhaul, and, most importantly, Borderlands had to throw away its sentiment from the first game, that the story didn't really matter. To this end, Gearbox brought in Anthony Birch as a lead writer on the game. He would be responsible for most of the actual writing in Borderlands 2. His vision, though, was to give the game a bit of a deeper narrative, to utilize the characters it had and create new ones that gave the world Gearbox had already crafted more depth. But he also was aware of the fact that some people wouldn't be interested in a Borderlands game with a heavier story. So his main goal was that the story didn't impede the enjoyment for those that didn't want it. Borderlands 2 was essentially another large risk and investment. This was something Gearbox decided early on because they essentially had two paths. They could make a Borderlands sequel in a year or two and do the same thing all over again, or they could stick their necks out like they did with the first game and try to create something even better. Borderlands 2 was released on September 18th, 2012 in North America, September 20th, 2012 in Australia, and September 21st, 2012 in the EU, all for the PlayStation 3, Xbox 360, and Microsoft Windows systems. With Borderlands 2, a lot changes in regards to how the game plays. Playing Borderlands 2 honestly makes the first game genuinely feel like a prototype. It feels like fleshing out an idea that wasn't entirely there yet, a proof of concept. And that's essentially what Borderlands was, but just an incredibly successful one. Borderlands 2 adds so many new mechanics and refines nearly every single part of its gameplay loop to make things more appealing. At its core, Borderlands 2 is still that Diablo meets Halo idea that Gearbox had all those years ago. Its goal is to combine the satisfying short-term systems of a first-person shooter with the dopamine-fueled long-term progression of an RPG. The basic moment-to-moment gameplay is the same as the previous game. We fire weapons and kill enemies with one of our 4 equipped guns. Each character class has a specific special ability they can use, and gaining experience from enemies and missions levels us up. We can use skill points to further our skill trees, which differ between classes. We can throw grenades, pick up ammo, melee enemies, etc. But there are a lot of things that have changed with Borderlands 2, adjustments that make the system work better overall. The biggest change, and the one we should probably first talk about, are the classes. The first game had 4 classes total, but Borderlands has 6, 4 that were introduced with the base game, and 2 that were introduced in DLCs later. Borderlands 2 replaces its initial 4 characters with 6 entirely new ones. This is because the original 4 party members from the first game will actually appear in Borderlands 2's story, but that's something we'll talk about in a bit. These 4 new characters are meant to drastically change the status quo of Borderlands. While each character in the first game certainly had their own lane or specialization, each character in the sequel feels genuinely distinct. The party from Borderlands tended to blend a bit together, and in the second game, these characters feel like they each take on a specific role and style of play. The first character we have is Maya, the Siren. Maya is a siren much in the same way that Lilith was. She has a strange influence over elements and odd powers at her disposal, but she's incredibly different from Lilith because her powers don't allow her to dip in and out of battle. They allow her to control the field of war by placing enemies in a stasis bubble. Every character has 3 distinct skill trees. You can place any number of skill points into either of these trees, but of course you need to place a certain amount into each level of the tree before gaining access to the next. Maya's 3 skill trees are Motion, Harmony, and Cataclysm. The first, Motion, mostly deals with crowd control and damage resistance. The first tier simply focuses on damage and shields. The second tier buffs Maya's phase lock ability and allows you to deflect bullets. The third tier increases movement speed and generates more shield, but it also contains an interesting skill called Converge. Each skill tree in the first Borderlands game had a kind of ultimate skill at the bottom that you were working towards. This skill would drastically change the way that your character was played. Borderlands 2 has these as well, but they also have a sort of medium version of that skill halfway through the tree. This helps with pacing and means that you aren't waiting until the end of your first skill tree before you get that massive gameplay adjustment. You don't have to dump so much time into a character before you realize you don't like the way that they're played. Maya's first midway skill, Converge, allows her phase lock to pull enemies towards the original target. The fourth tier increases Phase Lock's cooldown, and the fifth allows Phase Lock to be chained after killing an enemy. The final skill in Maya's motion tier allows her to take control of enemies when phase locked, causing them to fight alongside her for a short period of time, drastically altering the flow of combat. Her second skill tree, Harmony, mostly deals with healing and extra damage. The first tier increases damage and generates health from enemies killed by phase lock. The second tier increases healing and damage while enemies are phase locked. The third tier regenerates more health and reflects damage from you onto enemies. The res skill on the third tier allows Maya to use her phase lock to instantly revive teammates though. The fourth tier increases health regen, the fifth tier increases lifesteal, and Scorn turns Maya's melee attack into an orb of slag that damages enemies over time. Her final skill tree, Cataclysm, mostly deals with elemental damage and effects. The first tier increases elemental effect chance and reload speed. The second tier adds fire damage to phase lock, and the third tier allows bullets to ricochet while enemies are phase locked. The cloud kill ability on this tier creates an acid cloud when shooting an enemy that damages foes who touch it. The fourth tier increases gun damage based on enemies' health, and the fifth tier allows Maya to deal massive fire and corrosive damage for nearby enemies. The final skill, Ruin, adds slag, corrosion, and electric damage to the phase lock ability. Maya overall is just a fantastic character in Borderlands 2. She can control the battlefield and turn enemies to fight with her, she can heal her party, and she can turn into an elemental damage machine. The next character, Salvador, is my personal favorite in Borderlands 2. Salvador doesn't really have a good comparison from the original Borderlands crew. He does have some melee skills, so I guess you could relate him to Brick, but he's quite a bit different. His main ability is Gunzerker, which allows him to briefly dual-wield weapons. This ability is extremely useful and can be super overpowered because it effectively doubles your damage for a brief period. His three skills are Gunlust, Rampage, and Brawn. The first tree, Gunlust, deals mostly with reloading, buffing weapon swap, and generally increasing the effectiveness of guns. The first tier increases fire rate and critical hit damage. The second tier increases reload speed and damage after swapping a weapon, and the third tier increases damage when gunzerking. The first midway skill, Autoloader, reloads all weapons that aren't in your hands when killing an enemy. It also encourages weapon swapping because when you do so, the gun has increased fire rate for a period of time. The fourth tier allows for gunzerking when downed, and the fifth tier gives increased damage when your gunzerk ability is on cooldown. The final ability for the Gunlust skill tree is No Kill Like Overkill, which allows you to get bonus damage based on the amount you overkilled an enemy. Rampage, the second skill tree, focuses on increasing the length of gunzerking and gives Salvador more ammo. The first tier increases ammo conservation and capacity, the second tier increases reload speed and gunzerking duration, and the third tier increases the gunzerking cooldown rate, as well as extra ammo conservation. The first midway skill for this tree, Steady As She Goes, allows for more recoil reduction and improved accuracy when gunzerking. The fourth tier increases gunzerking duration when killing enemies, and the second midway skill, Double Your Fun, doubles grenades thrown when gunzerking. The fifth tier increases the gunzerking cooldown when shooting an enemy, and the final skill for the Rampage tree, Keep Firing, massively increases your fire rate and reload speed when gunzerking. The final tree for Salvador is Brawn, which deals with health regen, melee, and mostly soaking more damage. The first tier gives more max health and movement speed, the second tier reduces status effect duration and increases damage reduction, and the third tier gives you health regen when gunzerking, as well as fire rate when shields are depleted. Fistful of Hurt, the first midway skill, gives you massive damage on your melee attacks every 15 seconds. The fourth tier increases movement speed and gun damage based on different factors, and the fifth tier increases health regen upon taking damage. The final skill, Come At Me Bro, allows Salvador to flip enemies off while gunzerking to instantly heal to full health and reduce damage taken for a period. Salvador's character is about dealing a ton of damage. That's built into the character itself. Someone dual-wielding assault rifles is naturally going to be about kicking as much ass as possible. His skills all focus on doing more damage, doing that damage faster, and taking as much damage as possible before being downed. The third character, Axton, shares the most attributes with Roland from the first game. That being said, he's nowhere near as bland as the soldier from the previous entry. Axton does also have a turret that he can place down, but that turret can do a lot more than Roland's could. Primarily, it can, by default, fire in 360 degrees instead of just directly in front of itself. His skill trees are Guerrilla, Gunpowder, and Survival. The first tree, Guerrilla, mostly deals with buffing the turret so that it can take the damage the player isn't. The first tier increases the amount of bullets the turret can fire and increases Axton's reload speed. The second tier increases the turret's accuracy and Axton's shield recharge rate. The third tier gives increased gun damage and healing after killing an enemy. The first midway skill, Scorched Earth, adds rockets to the saber turret. The fourth tier increases grenade capacity, and the fifth tier increases gun and melee damage when shields are depleted. The final skill on the Gorilla tree, Double Up, adds another gun to the saber turret, and allows both guns to fire slag bullets. This means that enemies hit by the turrets can be easily exploited by Axton after they're slagged by the gun. The second tree, Gunpowder, mostly focuses on general weapon damage for Axton, but also massively buffs the turret. The first tier increases gun damage and weapon swap speed. The second tier increases magazine size for assault rifles and fire rate after killing enemies. The third tier increases recoil reduction, gun, melee, and grenade damage while the turret is deployed. The first midway skill, Longbow Turret, increases the deployed range of the turret by 10,000%, which is insane, and increases the turret's health. The fourth tree increases gun damage and fire rate with non-elemental guns, and includes the midway skill, Do or Die, which allows you to throw grenades when you're downed. The fifth tier increases a ton of stats by 1%, and the final skill, Nuke, sets off a small nuclear blast when you deploy a turret. The final tree, Survival, focuses on defense, buffing the turret's health, and also Axton's survivability. The first tier increases maximum health and shield capacity. The second tier increases gun damage during Fight for Your Life and reload speed when low on health. The third tier increases maximum health and shield regen when killing an enemy. The first midway skill, Phalanx Shield, gives the turret a large bubble that blocks enemy fire. The fourth tier increases the cooldown rate of the action skill and includes Maglock, another midway skill that allows the turret to be deployed on walls and ceilings. The fifth tier allows you to ignore damage based on a percentage chance, and the final skill, Gemini, allows you to deploy 2 saber turrets. Axton overall is the epitome of the soldier. He's kind of like Roland, but just upgraded by a lot. He also has a ton of survivability, but also focuses on doing a lot of damage and building up his turret to essentially be a killing machine in battle. The final base character for Borderlands 2 is Zero, who is probably the most unique character in terms of design. In fact, a lot of the higher-ups at Gearbox didn't think that Zero fit in with the Borderlands aesthetic. The design team were adamant, though, that he was a lone wolf and would fit in with the world because he was so distinct. Zero's closest comparison from the first game is that of Mordecai, but this is really just in their silhouette. They both happen to be lanky and move quickly. Zero wields a sword, and his ability, Deception, allows him to briefly summon a body double and then enter a stealth mode. It's more similar to Lilith's phase walk ability from the first game than anything else. Zero has 3 skill trees, Sniping, Cunning, and Bloodshed. The first tree focuses on exactly what it sounds like, doing damage from a distance. The first tier increases crit damage and aim steadiness. The second tier increases reload speed and accuracy. The third tier increases damage from the first shot in a mag and bullet spread. The first midway skill, Bore, allows shots to pierce through enemies. The fourth tier increases crit damage based on how long you aim down sights, and the fifth tier increases a lot of stats when using sniper rifles. The final skill, Critical Ascension, gives you a stack that increases critical hit damage and base damage with sniper rifles when scoring a critical hit. This can stack up to 999 times and only goes away if you don't hit a critical spot for a while. Zero's second tree, Cunning, is mostly about improving his deception ability. The first tier increases reload speed and melee damage. The second tier increases fire rate when shields are depleted and damage when ambushing enemies. The third tier increases melee damage when successfully attacking and allows your deception decoy to explode and damage enemies. The first midway skill, Death Mark, allows you to mark targets when dealing melee damage to them. This increases the damage done to them for a brief period of time. The fourth tier increases stats when deception is active, and the fifth tier increases the chance to fire your weapon twice. The final ability, Death Blossom, allows Zero to throw a bunch of kunai knives when he activates deception. The final skill tree, Bloodshed, mostly focuses on buffing melee damage. The first tier increases melee damage and maximum health. The second tier increases health regen and melee damage after shooting enemies. The third tier increases movement speed and other stats after killing enemies, and increases the damage melee does when hitting an enemy in the back. The midway skill for this tree is Execute, which allows you to melee dash forward and deal massive damage with a special melee attack. The fourth tier restores health when killing an enemy with melee, and the fifth tier increases gun and melee damage when moving. The final skill, Many Must Fall, increases the amount of decoys you have when killing enemies in deception mode, and it also increases the length of the skill. Zero's character class is all about moving fast and doing lots of damage. He does more damage when running, but he's also best when he can hide in his deception and attack enemies from a hidden position. Like I said before, there are two other classes in the game that came from DLCs, but we'll talk about those characters in the DLC section. The main four characters in Borderlands 2 are great though, and honestly one-up the original cast in almost every way possible. One of the reasons this happens is because the skill trees are greatly expanded. The first game only had 4 tiers of skills, not including the final ultimate skill for each tree. This means that each skill carries a lot more weight in the first entry, so skills that only increase base stats feel like they start to waste spots a bit. Each character and even branch of the skill tree feels like they have their own core ideas, they have their own reasons for existing, and they alter the playstyles of the characters that they're attached to. The development team specifically felt limited by the original cast. They felt like they weren't as dynamic as they wanted them to be, at least in playstyles. This led to the creation of Borderlands 2's casts, where each character doesn't just fill a particular role, but fills many roles that are unique to just them. This means that you can have a lot more variety in builds. This leads to not only longer playtime, but a more focused playthrough. An experience that's tailored to what you want, rather than pigeonholing you into whatever works best. Of course, these kinds of games are always going to have builds and classes that work better than others, but Borderlands 2 at least gives you a large amount of options. In addition to new classes, Borderlands 2 introduces a ton of other changes. While it adds many things, it did remove one big feature from the first game, in that of weapon proficiencies. In the first game, the more you used weapons, the more your character's proficiency with that weapon type increased. This would in turn increase different stats when using that type of weapon. This was, in theory, a good design decision for the first game, but honestly, it just wasn't that necessary in the long run. Most of the time when I played the first game, I really just wasn't paying attention to weapon proficiencies. They sort of faded in the background, so their removal in the sequel wasn't a bad move. The weapons themselves in Borderlands 2 have also been basically overhauled. The first game included weapon manufacturers, but like everything else in Borderlands 2, this game makes them far more distinct. Each manufacturer has a specific specialty this time around, including a very distinct look and style. Bandit weapons are focused around having incredibly large magazines. They have a high ammo capacity and also have a particularly homemade style. Gearbox wanted this manufacturer to look like Bandits had taken ramshackle pieces of steel and leftover scraps to create these weapons, and it shows. Dahl makes a return in Borderlands 2, mainly focused on burst fire weapons. These weapons were meant to look more modern and sleek. Hyperion, a manufacturer that has a large part to play in the actual main story of Borderlands 2, has a distinct color scheme. Their main inspiration was drawn from Claptrap and his design, and of course many of the other Hyperion enemies that we'll face in the game. Jacobs returns as well, making non-elemental weapons that are sort of a Western style. They were specifically inspired by cowboy films, pistols with big barrels. Malawan is meant to be the elemental weapon manufacturer. They focus on this specialty, but they also have a sleek and high-tech design. Gearbox specifically took inspiration from Apple devices and Austrian car manufacturers. Tediore is a special manufacturer because their weapons are meant to be disposable. After you run out of ammo, instead of reloading, the weapon is thrown like a grenade. Because of this, the team took inspiration from disposable tools like lighters, razors, anything that was cheap plastic. Torg is a returning manufacturer that's still based on large explosions. These guns originally started out as an ode to 80s machine guns and just got larger. Vladov, the final weapons manufacturer, focuses on full auto weapons and high fire rates. They were based on Russian designs, and their specialty was meant to be having multiple barrels. There are 2 extra manufacturers introduced in Borderlands 2 that actually don't make any weapons. Pangolin and Anshin only make shields and class mods. Loot is basically the name of the game with Borderlands 2 though. Getting as much loot as possible and upgrading your character's abilities is what the whole thing is about. So the loot system is incredibly important. And the sequel tweaks the way that loot works quite a bit. Of course, we still get weapons that drop from enemies and bosses, and we can get great loot from a variety of different chests that we encounter throughout the game. Gearbox's Paul Hellquist actually wrote a great breakdown of the loot system on Gearbox's website in 2013. Borderlands 2, just like the first game in the series, has a procedural loot system. This means that instead of static weapons, it generates unique weapons when they're dropped. For enemies specifically, each one is connected to a loot table. This contains all of the items that they could drop, and obviously these lists are larger if they're more powerful enemies. When an enemy is killed, this generates a random number, and determines if it's less or more than the odds that any specific weapon from the table is dropped. The game actually also factors in how many players are currently in the game. If you have a larger party, then more enemies are spawned. Originally, during development, there was far too much loot being dropped, so they had to reduce the amount dropped because of the increase in enemies. But even with this decrease, you still get more loot dropped when in parties. But how does Borderlands 2 actually choose which weapon to drop? Well, the list that's attached to an enemy contains a bunch of item pools. The game then generates a random number to pick one of these item pools. A lot of the time, these pools contain even more pools inside, and numbers are generated down the line until the game finally gets to a weapon or a piece of gear, and then drops it based on its odds of dropping. This also, of course, includes all of the various parts for each weapon that the first game's system did. The aforementioned article from Paul Hellquist actually includes a rarity table with probabilities listed for each. This is probably a good time to talk about rarities and how they've changed in the sequel. In the original game, there was technically 6 rarities, ranging from common to pearlescent. In Borderlands 2, there are also 6 rarities, but only in the base game. The DLCs add another 5 rarities. The base rarities are common, uncommon, rare, epic, E-Tech, and legendary. E-Tech is really the only new rarity for the base game, and is a way to incorporate the Iridium weapons from the previous game. Instead of having a whole weapon type of Iridium weapons, that technology has now been incorporated into the development of some weapons, making them more powerful. The various DLC expansions introduce Cursed, Gemstone, Effervescent, Seraph, and Pearlescent rarities, as well, with the latter 3 being the highest in the game. Borderlands 2 almost doubles the amount of rarities in the game as well. Even with the base rarities, there's just a lot more depth here. Borderlands 2 also contains unique weapons, something the first game introduced. These weapons are sort of fixed in the sense that they have an appearance and some attributes that are always the same. These items are usually dropped from specific enemies or quests, but the item's attributes are still rolled when they're dropped, so you can get a very good or a very bad version of every unique. Weapon and gear variety in general has also increased. While gear across the board now just has more focus, you can get a lot of different variations on these focuses. The possibilities are just endless. There's so many variables at play that you can almost never get the exact same thing twice. This is mostly a carryover from Borderlands 1, but the way that Borderlands 2 integrates new gear into the system just clicks so well. Weapons feel genuinely special. A unique or higher rarity feels like an amazing find. That weapon ends up lasting you a long time, especially if it's a good version of it. This feeds back into the power gameplay loop that Borderlands 2 creates. Give satisfying rewards for challenges completed, and people will want to keep playing. Borderlands 2 also introduces a new currency in the form of Iridium. Iridium is essentially a natural resource that was released into the world after we opened the vault in the first game. It will be important to the story later, but as a mechanic, it's another currency that we collect instead of cash. We can use Iridium first and foremost to upgrade our gear storage capacity and our ammo capacity for each weapon type. This is a change from using cash like we did in Borderlands. Iridium has many other uses as well, though. It's used as payment to access raid bosses, it's used for chests in some of the DLC. It's an incredibly valuable currency that you will absolutely need to collect once you get to Endgame. One of my favorite introductions that Borderlands 2 makes is the Badass rank. This is a new system that allows you to accumulate permanent progression across characters. Complete challenges from a list like kill 100 enemies with an assault rifle, or more specific ones like find all the hidden vault symbols in Sanctuary, and you'll get badass ranks. These ranks then give you points that you can use to permanently upgrade your stats. These are then automatically applied even when you start a new character. In my mind, this is a huge decision because you're giving the player something for getting further in the game, something that lasts across playthroughs. It's tangible, it can be felt. And starting with a new character doesn't feel like you're starting from square one. I mostly played Borderlands 2 on my PS3 when it came out, but I had played the PC version a little bit back in the day. Even now, 10 years later, I booted up Borderlands 2 and still had badass rank from all those years ago, an echo through time of my progression, rewarding me for playing even a decade later. These challenges also provide a ton of replayability. They force you to fully explore the areas of the map, to seek out hidden collectibles, to adjust your playstyle. The system forces you to step outside of your comfort zone, slightly in the interest of permanent progression. We can also now customize our characters in Borderlands 2. Throughout the game, you'll pick up skins from loot dropped by enemies, and you'll gain them as quest rewards. These skins can either be for your character or your vehicle. They also have rarity associated with them, so you can get epic skins that are a bit more rare than the common ones. It's a neat little introduction that definitely goes further in co-op mode, so you can show off your sick rare skins to your jealous friends. But perhaps the biggest upgrade that Borderlands sequel makes to gameplay is in that of enemy variety. The first game's enemies were fairly standard by comparison, at least. There were a few variants that require you to readjust position or switch your playstyle. The spider ants, for example, had a weak spot on their back, so you had to move around and get behind them. Borderlands 2 goes all the way with this idea. Each enemy type feels wildly different to fight against, and each one requires a much different approach. Bullet reflection is now something that you have to think about because many enemies in the game will reflect your attacks back at you. So you can't just barrel your way through them, you have to be strategic. Lots of enemies have shields, they hide their weak spots, you have to constantly reposition and move around the battlefield. There's a lot more strategy worked into the moment-to-moment gameplay, which feels more challenging and thus rewarding. It also just livens the game up a bit. The variety gives us more to chew on. It makes the game last longer overall. And when you're going to be playing something for possibly 1,000 hours, you don't want to fight the same things over and over again. I listed a lot of changes, but that doesn't mean that the core of Borderlands has changed with the sequel. If anything, that is the one thing that has stayed true. Borderlands 2 is still a game about killing enemies, completing quests, taking out huge monsters, and getting a ton of loot. It's about this cycle of progression, slowly getting stronger, getting more powerful until eventually you're unrecognizable and you can take on the best that the game has to offer. It's satisfaction distilled into a gaming formula. That is what Borderlands does best, and the changes that the sequel makes all assist the game in doing that even better. And one of the largest changes that we haven't talked about is with how much more prominent the narrative is in this entry. So it's probably a good time to talk about story. One of the goals with Borderlands 2 was to make story more of a focus. That doesn't mean that Borderlands as a series had entirely ditched its philosophy that the story was the backseat driver to the gameplay. but the team was still determined to do something with more depth, to give the audience something that they could engage with on a deeper level. Borderlands 2 begins much like the first game, with Marcus Kincaid narrating a story.
So, you want to hear another story, huh? One where the very fate of Pandora hangs in the balance. If not, too bad, I'm telling you anyway.
He recaps some of the events of the first game, mainly that the Vault Hunters opened the vault and defeated the monster inside. He speaks of the emergence of Iridium as an incredibly valuable resource, and how it attracted Hyperion to the planet. Hyperion was after these great stores of Iridium, but in the process, the company, and its leader, Handsome Jack, sought to, quote-unquote, civilize Pandora. A new vault was rumored to be out there somewhere, ready to be opened. Now, a group of new Vault Hunters sets out to see if they can uncover what's inside before Hyperion. Borderlands 2 introduces us to our characters in much the same way that the first game did, with an action sequence set to music. We follow some bandits throughout the desert, the familiar brown landscape in the background, before that vehicle is promptly smashed by a moving train. This is a figurative representation of the Borderlands series entering a new era. These drab dunes and brown wastelands are meant for the past, because Borderlands 2 will be filled with color. Our 4 heroes, Maya, Axton, Salvador, and Zero, are all on a train. Introduced to us one by one as they fight off Hyperion robots, the group is tricked into activating a trap, set by Handsome Jack himself. The train explodes and the Vault Hunters are dumped into a snowy wasteland. As we awake, we're greeted by the obnoxious sounds of Claptrap's voice. He's made a habit out of burying the dead Vault Hunters that Jack drops here. He introduces us to our HUD just like he did in the first game. We're contacted once again by the Guardian Angel, similar to how we were contacted in the first game. She claims that she's here to assist us, and we don't have any other choice but to trust her. We're guided back to Claptrap's home, where he is very quickly assaulted by a Bullymong, a new type of enemy common to the area. We have to head outside and defeat the Bullymong that stole Claptrap's eye so that he can see again, and hopefully guide us out of this place. Of course, the game uses this moment to try and milk the blind Claptrap for as much humor as it can. Regardless of whether we find him annoying or not, our Guardian Angel tells us that we'll need his help to get to Handsome Jack, so we have to save him. We're pretty quickly contacted by Handsome Jack for the first time over echo comms. He basically just tells us to die so he doesn't have to deal with it. The first thing you'll notice about Jack is that he's smarmy, cocky, and what Borderlands 2 would describe as a douche. His character is probably the most contextualized in the base game, but for now, he's just a guy for us to hate. Once we defeat our first semi-boss and get Claptrap's eye back, he immediately fails to get us entrance into a Hyperion facility. Luckily, our Guardian Angel helps. We then head to Liarsburg, a nearby small outpost in the glacier. It's overrun with small bandits though, so we defeat them and free the place up. This pisses off Flint, the leader of the bandits in the area, but we gain a new friend in turn, Sir Hammerlock. His tagline is Hunter, Scholar, Gentleman, and those 3 words describe him pretty well. He's like an old British hunter, and his mechanical prosthetics visually prove the adventures that he's been on. Talking to Hammerlock, he'll tell us a bit about the Crimson Raiders, a local organization that seems like the only people who aren't trying to kill and rob everyone they see. They're based out of Sanctuary, the next place that we need to head to. We can return power to Liarsburg, and with Claptrap back in working order, we can head out of the settlement to try and get to his ship. He promises to be able to take us to Sanctuary. On our way, we're forced to fight 2 brothers, Boom and Boom. We can then take Claptrap and climb Flint's massive dragon ship that's stuck in the side of an iceberg. Up here, we have a boss battle with the Flame Master himself, and take him out. Taking Claptrap's ship out of the area gets us one step closer to Sanctuary, but of course, we have to handle some stuff first. Unfortunately, Scooter's catch-a-ride machines are down, so we need to fix them. We can then take a new vehicle over to the Sanctuary gates. We get to talk to Roland here, returning from the first game. He's now head of the Crimson Raiders. He wants us to rescue Colonel Reese, who has been captured, and then we will have a place with the organization. On the way, Handsome Jack reveals that Pandora is having earthquakes because he's drilling into the planet to find the location of the vault, and he's getting closer. By the time we get to Reese, he's already dying. The bandits in the area stole the power core that he had, a vital piece of Sanctuary's defenses. We can go get it back and take it to Sanctuary so that their shields are restored. An introduction that Borderlands 2 makes that I haven't talked about yet is dynamic quest objectives. In the first game, you generally get a set objective, complete it, and turn the quest in. With Borderlands 2, these objectives aren't always what they seem. They may start out straightforward, but often get more complicated as the mission evolves and changes. For example, the Road to Sanctuary mission starts out with the objective, use the Catch-A-Ride. Obviously, this is complicated by the Catch-A-Ride being broken and our needing to retrieve the Hyperion adapter. The objective changes. Then when we get the objective, go to Sanctuary and arrive at the gates, it's once again changed to find Reese. When he dies, it changes again to find the power core. I do think this is an overall good change, and it's well used in Borderlands 2 for the most part. First of all, it makes the missions actually feel realistic and dynamic, like these stories are unfolding before you, and things don't always go as planned. It sucks you further into the story and transplants you better into the character you're playing, because sometimes the complication of the mission results in your frustration. That frustration is felt by player and character alike, but sometimes the missions are too convoluted, enough that they become an encumbrance. This is the fine line that Borderlands 2 has to walk between dynamic missions that are too simple and don't keep you engaged, and ones that are too complicated to keep you invested. These missions are best used for humor, though, when a mission really doesn't go as planned or when an NPC changes their mind and the mission objectives reflect this. It's as if the game's own systems are aware that we are a player, that we are a mindless pawn ticking off objectives on a list. Getting back to Sanctuary, we can talk to Lieutenant Davis, who monitors the power generator for the shields. We can install the new power core and watch the shields go up. We even watch the Hyperion satellite in the sky fire off missiles at the settlement, but they're easily interrupted by the massive bubble that Sanctuary is placed in. Inside the town, we're introduced to a bunch of familiar faces and returning characters, the first of which is Scooter. He survived and became the Sanctuary town mechanic. Sanctuary was built on the ruins of a Dahl Corporation's interplanetary mining ship. He gives us some iridium and fuel cells. We then use them to power up the town. We're even quickly introduced to Crazy Earl during these events, the owner of the junkyard from the first game. The fuel cells end up not working, and we learn that Roland has gone missing. From the clues that we gather, it seems that he may have been captured by the Firehawk, a notorious mass-murdering bandit in the area, so we need to go rescue him. First, I'd like to talk about Sanctuary and the decision to bring back the original party from the first game. Sanctuary is basically what will become our home base or central hub for the rest of Borderlands 2. It is this game's New Haven, but it's better executed in just about every way. First of all, New Haven is introduced way too late into the game for it to be considered a real hub, and plus it never really feels like we're that at home there. It's a ramshackle settlement, not a place with too much personality. Sanctuary feels like a real location, a spot where the Crimson Raiders have laid their last line of defense. In addition to that, there's a lot more functionality built into Sanctuary as a home base. This is where we get most of our missions in the game. Some side quests we'll retrieve from characters out in the world, but a lot of them come from the Crimson Raiders in Sanctuary. Another improvement that Gearbox made to the quest system was to limit the amount of missions that the player gets from bounty boards. They wanted more quests to add something to a character or to characterize the world. Sanctuary contains many NPCs. We can find Claptrap stationed here eventually in a small hovel in the back of the city. The returning Dr. Zed has fled Firestone and taken up residence here. Mad Moxie runs a bar in town. Sir Hammerlock frequents that same bar, and Patricia Tanis stays in the bottom floor of the Crimson Raiders HQ. There are other characters that call this place home that we'll meet shortly, but that's all part of getting the band back together. Speaking of the band, Borderlands 2 replaces the original Vault Hunters with new ones, and instead of entirely scrapping those characters, adds them as critical parts of the game's narrative. This is a fantastic story decision because it allows these characters to be further fleshed out, which they couldn't be in the first game because they were all silent protagonists. Adding them into this story lends a bit of familiarity for the players that delved into the first entry. Similarly, the main protagonists in Borderlands 2 are silent and not contextualized in this entry, at least not directly. The team ran focus groups toward the end of development, and the resounding response was that Borderlands 2 felt like it had a world where everyone was constantly talking, so it felt odd and vacant that the main characters never spoke. It was far too late into development to add in lines from these characters, so the team had to settle for less. They included echo journals of each character to flesh out their backstories, but because they were introduced so late in development, they don't always fit the bill. Salvador's journals reveal that he was getting revenge on bandits for attacking his town and his people, but since he murdered the bandits so brutally, he was meant to be hanged. Hyperion attacked the town before that could happen though, and he tortured the soldiers to find out about the vault. Axton was in service of the Dahl military force before he was simultaneously divorced and discharged by his wife and commanding officer. He became a bounty hunter but found the job too simple and sought off the challenge of Pandora and its vault. Zero is on Pandora for similar reasons. Starting out as an assassin for hire, he found that he was too good at his job, and his prey rarely ever fought back. He left for Pandora to find adventure and challenge. Maya is specifically trying to find out where the sirens came from. Since she herself is one, she wants to investigate their origin and uncover the past. She was left as a baby with the Order of the Impending Storm, an order of monks on the planet Athenas. She was groomed to be the people's savior, but she wanted to do more than that. She didn't want to be used to control people. Now, this is where things don't really add up, because while Maya is probably the most characterized out of the four, her motivations don't really make sense in the context of Borderlands 2. She will, pretty quickly, meet a siren in the story, but of course, still stays silent, and this doesn't seem to change her mission at all. These motivations are all just ethereal and unspoken. In our main quest, we can head to Frostburn Canyon to look for Roland and the Firehawk. We can find the Firehawk's lair, and the person we're looking for is revealed to actually be Lilith. She spent all of her power fighting the remaining ones off and is tapped. We have to give her some iridium to get her back to normal. She tells us that she works for the Crimson Raiders while we fight off bandits invading the lair. She generally handles the bandits while Roland is freed up to take on Jack. Once we're done, she teleports us into the Bloodshot stronghold, but with her powers weakened, this goes awry and we're sent just 30 feet away. Looks like we're gonna have to get in the normal way. The Bloodshot stronghold is heavily armored with great defenses. We can't get inside normally, so we need to get a bandit-type vehicle to convince the guards to let us in. This leads to us meeting a new friend, Ellie, who is Scooter's sister, and has a mechanic shop out here in the dunes. She's just as weird and extravagant as Scooter, but not quite as dumb. She sends us out to destroy bandit vehicles, grabbing their parts and building a new one. This vehicle allows us to get past the front gates and to infiltrate the Bloodshot stronghold. We fight Bad Maw here, a bandit with a large shield covered in smaller bandits. We can head inside and finally find Roland in a cell, but he's immediately grabbed by a Hyperion robot. We of course have to go rescue him as we fight through an area infested with Hyperion mechanical soldiers. We defeat the Warden boss as he has Roland captured in a cage on top of him. Once we do this, we actually get to fight alongside Roland for a minute. He throws his turret out on the battlefield and we join him in taking apart mechs. Anytime we get to fight with any of the original crew is really a great moment. It almost defines these OG Vault Hunters because it feels like they've been doing this for far longer than we have. They're among the few that have managed to survive out here, not just by scraping by, but actually by doing good for others. Heading back to Sanctuary, we can meet Roland, who is with Lilith at the Resistance HQ. He asks us to help him take out Handsome Jack. Based on some recent intel, the group has found out that Jack wants to control the vault, not open it. The vault is not a storage of weapons and gear, but an ancient Iridian warrior, and Jack means to take control of it. Roland wants to take control of the warrior himself and take out Hyperion instead of Pandora. Our next goal is to get the vault key, but to do that, we need to make contact with Roland's spy in the Tundra Express. Here, we're reintroduced to Mordecai and his pet Bloodwing. He gives us the intel that there's a Hyperion train heading through the area, and the vault key is aboard, so we can meet Roland's other friend in this area, Tiny Tina, to help us out. Tiny Tina is a strange character, one that, aside from Claptrap, entirely encapsulates Borderlands' sense of humor and style. It's also where my love-hate relationship with this series begins. Borderlands 2 changes many things about the formula that the first game established, but it also makes a large change in the tone and humor that the game offers. The comedy in Borderlands 2 is a lot faster, much more present, and is generally stepped up a notch. This is a mixed bag though. Some jokes land and others just do not. One of the things that commonly makes jokes not land in Borderlands 2 is just how dated they are at this point. There are so many timely memes and references inserted into the game that just probably didn't really need to be there. Tiny Tina, though, is probably Borderlands 2's most popular character, and for good reason, because a lot of this humor and style actually fit with her character. She's a 14-year-old girl, so it makes sense that she'd have dumb humor that doesn't always land. She'd say things that rely on quirky shock value and references. It feels like it fits. The places where Borderlands 2 fails are generally where these jokes don't fit or don't feel too present. But again, I feel similarly to this as I did the first game. The comedy was something that I expected to hate, and it just never really bugged me that much. At its worst, it was fine, and at its best, it got a chuckle out of me. Tiny Tina, though, is another exception, because in hindsight, her character is far better fleshed out, but that doesn't fully happen until her DLC, so I'll talk about that then. Tina has us find 2 missiles, and since she specializes in explosives, she sets these up to fire at the train heading into the area. We can go plant them and derail the thing. We then head up to where the train crashed to grab the vault key, but unfortunately, the whole thing was a trap. Jack's Hyperion robot Wilhelm is here to kill us. He's actually our first boss in the game that has a full health bar at the top of the screen. He's fast, uses whirlwind attacks, and summons new robots to fight for him and repair his shields. Once we defeat Wilhelm, we can pick up a power core in the wreckage. This can be taken back to Sanctuary so that they don't have to worry about dying power cores anymore. Installing the new power core, it's clear that we were tricked once again. Our guardian angel betrays us and uses the new power core to lower the shields around Sanctuary. The Hyperion satellite starts launching a massive assault on the town. While this is happening, we can help Lilith, Roland, and Scooter get the city out of here. Lilith uses her powers to phase the city to a different location, but unfortunately, this sends us off into the crater. Thankfully, the city itself is safe though. Our guardian angel maintains that she's still on our side and sends us to the Highlands to look for the new Sanctuary location. On our way there, she tells the new Vault Hunters about how she worked against the old Vault Hunters in the previous game, but she's now grown tired of manipulating people and wants to help us. She finally tells us that we have to work with her because she has the key. One thing I haven't quite talked about yet in Borderlands 2 is side quests. A lot of the optional missions in this game are a huge step above those from the previous entry. There are so many standout side quests in the game, but I'll only talk about a few so that this video doesn't run past 12 hours. One of my favorites in the game is a quest chain that we get from Ellie. There are 2 clans in the area, one named the Zaffords and one named the Hodunks. Ellie wants to pit both of these clans against each other and start a war. We take on many different quests, blowing up racetracks, crashing a wake, destroying distilleries, all in the name of implicating the other clan. We're playing both sides, and eventually at the end of the long chain of missions, we get to pick a side. It's just a great quest chain that feels almost like a mini DLC. It widens the world a bit to know that out among the wastes, there's just these 2 warring families that absolutely hate each other. It also happens to be pretty funny all the way through. There's a couple neat missions that are isolated just to Sanctuary. One has us helping out a detective who wants to pick out a murderer, and the other sees us helping a group of thieves decide who was the double-crosser among them. They're short missions, but play on the Vault Hunters getting involved in the community of Sanctuary. Also, the sheriff of Sanctuary just happens to be a super lazy shithead, which throws some humor into the mix. There's also a quest we get from Tina that has us setting up a tea party for her in her cave. We have to rescue some of her stuffed friends and eventually capture a bandit named Flesh Stick so that she can shock him and force him to drink tea. The biggest things that the side missions in Borderlands 2 do is expand the characters. The team wanted the side quests to almost be entirely given by NPCs instead of bounty boards. This is because when you get a quest from a person, they are asking something of you. They want something, and that gives us information about them. It's not just a mission so that you can get extra experience out of the game, it's a moment to breathe and learn a bit more about the character that gave you the mission, but also the other people involved in the mission. It also broadens the world of Borderlands quite a lot. Pandora feels like a functioning planet more than ever before. While a lot of it is desolate wasteland, it feels like Pandora has people living there, people that are doing things with histories and relationships. There's a lot more going on in the sequel because a lot of the first game was just a desolate wasteland. Getting to the Highlands, we have to get a new fast travel station up and running so we can return to the now floating city in the sky. Back in Sanctuary, the entire team is contacted by Angel. She assures us that she can help us find the vault key, but they're all distrusting of her. She eventually gains their trust after telling them Jack's plans. He needs to charge the vault key, which takes 200 years. He doesn't have that time, so he has decided to use Angel's power to charge it much faster. She tells us to head to her AI core in the 1,000 Cuts. There's a lot of defenses included in the facility, though, that we need to take out first. We can head to the Hyperion Preserve, where we meet up with Mordecai. He overlooks us as we invade the facility, sniping enemies from afar. He says that the people inside stole Bloodwing, so we need to go inside and get her out. Bloodwing also happens to have all of the data we need on a chip in her collar. Once we get to the top of the facility, Jack reveals that he's been experimenting on Bloodwing with Iridium. She's forced to attack us, and we have to weaken her to stop her. She actually controls every element in this boss battle. Once we weaken her enough, Mordecai hits her with a tranq and all is fine, except that Jack rigged her collar to explode. This greatly enrages Mordecai, setting him out on a path of vengeance against Jack. This is actually a deeply emotional part of the game and one of the better developments in the story. Bloodwing's death is something we don't really see coming. It also sets up Jack as a formidable villain. It gives the player and characters more motivation to go after him, and it also pulls a lot of his humanity away, that he's willing to go to these lengths for power. We can head back to Sanctuary and deliver the upgrade to Claptrap, who can now go invisible and help us get inside the Hyperion facility we're trying to access. First, Roland gives us a note to deliver to a bandit called the Slab King. He was a part of the Crimson Raiders at one point, but he was kicked out for being too brutal. This actually turns out to be Brick, the final member of the OG Vault Hunters. He agrees to give us his flying buzzard vehicles to take out Jack's bunker. Of course, Jack immediately starts assaulting the place with mortars, and we have to help him take out the beacons. Back at Sanctuary, Angel throws a wrench in our plans once again. To get into the door to her chambers, we need Jack's voice, so we need to head to the City of Opportunity to take out some of Jack's body doubles. The City of Opportunity is probably my favorite area in the entire game. It's probably one of the best locations for environmental storytelling in Borderlands 2. The City of Opportunity is actually a Hyperion-built city led by Handsome Jack. It's his ideal future and vision for what he wants Pandora to look like, filled wall to wall with propaganda about Jack's rise, the courtyards lined with statues of Jack himself. It's a city that represents Jack's ideal for a fascist utopia that he hopes Pandora will one day become. The Hyperion color scheme permeates the place and infects other areas of the world as well. It's represented as almost a virus that's infesting the wilds of Pandora, slowly creeping in and taking it over. Once we get the necessary voice samples, we can head back to Sanctuary to start the final plan. Mordecai and Lilith are set to stay back in Sanctuary, just in case this is another trap. Roland and Brick will be joining us in the assault though. We get Claptrap to help us once again, who moves past the barrier and lets us inside. Heading up to the top of the facility, we can destroy the massive cannons placed to protect the building, but a boss emerges, a huge flying bunker that will swoop down and attack us. We can take it out and finally gain access to the control core. On the way, Jack gets more and more aggressive as Angel starts to tell us about why Jack needs a siren. She's essentially a catalyst for opening the vault. The biggest surprise is that Angel wants us to kill her, to destroy that catalyst, so Jack truly won't be able to open the vault. Angel also happens to be Jack's own daughter. She's been kept hidden here for years, being injected with Iridium to charge the vault key. This results in a sort of boss fight against Angel. We have to destroy 3 Iridium injectors to take down her shield, but Jack has shielded those remotely and started sending in Hyperion robots, so we have to wait for Roland to deactivate the shields manually. It's a pretty long battle, but it does a lot of characterization for Jack. We learn the lengths that he's willing to go to try and get the vault open, to keep his own daughter hidden from the world to gain some sort of control. But this battle also represents his breaking point, the moment where he starts to actually be fazed by something. Handsome Jack has been pretty cool, calm, and collected for the entirety of the story. Even in the beginning of the game, we're hearing about how he killed Helena Pierce, the leader of New Haven from the previous game, and not only that, but laughing in her face while he did it. Also, every time that the Crimson Raiders develop a plan to stop him, he seems to be one step ahead of us. So it almost sets a precedent. It feels like Jack can't be broken, that whatever is driving him will just keep going forever. But in this moment, he does break. He shows genuine anger and almost fear at seeing his daughter killed. It transforms him from this unbreakable villain into an actual person. After downing the shields, we can approach Angel, where she gives her father one last goodbye. As she lays dying with the vault key beside her, the mission is complete. Just when it seems like we've won, Roland is shot through the chest by an appearing Handsome Jack. As Lilith attacks him, he puts a collar on her neck, preventing her from using her powers. We may have taken his catalyst, but he just got another one. He tries to force her to kill us, but she teleports us back to Sanctuary. She's now the one speaking to us instead of Angel. We can get a side quest from Mordecai to tell the people of Sanctuary that Roland died. It's actually a pretty sobering quest and brings some genuine emotion to what seems like an exclusively goofy game. It showcases just how much of an effect Roland had. He was a leader to these people, a shining symbol at the top of the organization that kept them going forward. Our new goal is now to get Lilith back and hopefully stop Jack from awakening the warrior. We help Brick steal some explosives so that we can gain access to the Hyperion info stockade. This thankfully gives us the location of the warrior and allows us to destroy a massive Iridian pipeline on the way. While there, we can also revisit Firestone, the first area from Borderlands 1. It's been taken over by Hyperion infrastructure. The small town and dotted landmarks are now covered in Hyperion buildings and Iridium pipes. We can then prepare for the final mission. We guide Claptrap up to a massive door leading to the warrior's location. We have to defend him as he opens the way. After a lot of technical difficulties and some help from Brick and Mordecai, we can gain access to the warrior's location. Unfortunately, Jack is already here with Lilith and has started to summon the warrior. We have a short boss battle against him as he summons a bunch of decoys. It's not over when we defeat him though, because he manages to use the key and the warrior comes out of the ground. A massive rock magma beast that dives in the lava and spits fire at us. He has a weak point on his chest that we can target to do a lot more damage to him, but he's obviously a very formidable foe. Once we take him out though, Jack gives a long monologue and we can kill him during it, satiating our game-long need for bloodlust. Optionally, we can let Lilith kill him, getting her revenge for Roland's death. Brick and Mordecai show up to celebrate our win together. Lilith tries to destroy the key, but only reveals a massive galactic map, with more vaults on different planets in the galaxy. This ends the main campaign of Borderlands 2. Overall, I think the story is a massive step up from the first game in the series. The biggest thing that it holds over its predecessor is that of stakes. Borderlands 2 feels like it has permanence. It feels like there are costs and tolls that have to be paid for the journey that we embarked on. Of course, the game has a lot of humor, but it isn't afraid to allow the reality of the world to seep in. And I think that Borderlands 2 strikes that balance very well. Does it fall more on the humor side most of the time? Yeah, but the game knows when it needs to be serious and when it can take things easy. The moments that it picks to get emotional are well placed and executed. Seeing characters like Roland and Bloodwing die gives everyone involved motivation. We have to win because if we don't, they died for nothing. The characters in the player are forced to make their deaths meaningful. It is responsibility that is thrust upon the player. It's also worth noting that the only two characters that died were returning ones, characters introduced in the first game. We're seeing groups of people mourn, but these characters affected are all ones that we already know. The only people really new to this equation are the new main characters, these silent protagonists that serve only as avatars of our blood and fury. We, the players, are mourning with the townsfolk and the Crimson Raiders as well, because we presumably knew Roland and Bloodwing, having already played the first game. It's been said before as well, but Handsome Jack is just a fantastic villain. He's incredibly easy to hate, but he's also realistically built. I remember this was said all the time when Borderlands 2 came out, but Jack is a perfect representation of a villain that doesn't think he's a villain. We will get into Jack's origin story more in the next game, but Borderlands 2 has some specific side quests that further contextualize the character. He was genuinely trying to protect his daughter at first, especially because it's revealed that Angel accidentally killed her own mother while trying to protect their family. He was trying to subdue her, but also harness her power at the same time. It's no excuse, and Jack is not a sympathetic villain at all, but throughout the game he constantly refers to the Vault Hunters as bandits. He genuinely believes that the people of Sanctuary are just outskirts, wasteland drifters, attempting to destroy everything he's created. He's both a maniacal villain that wants to take over a planet, and a man that's trying to protect his remaining family. The original Borderlands characters are also further contextualized. Lilith and Roland had a relationship. It's clear that Mordecai has become a sort of drunkard, and Brick has devolved into a brutal bandit-killing machine. They feel like actual characters in this game, though. Actual people, not just nameless, faceless avatars for loot. And Borderlands 2 has this uncanny ability to juxtapose its humor with genuine moments of emotion. There's one very famous one that we'll talk about in the DLC, but there's also a side quest from the main game where you're asked by Claptrap to help him throw a birthday party. He invites a bunch of people, but no one wants to go. You sit there with him in his dirty trash hovel as he slowly realizes no one is showing up. It's this sad, sort of depressing moment. Even though he's a robot and he's definitely annoying, Borderlands 2 manages to characterize even him as someone who's looking for a place to belong. But of course, it's Borderlands, so the main story isn't even close to the end of the game. We still have a lot to talk about. Borderlands 1 essentially had 4 different expansions or pieces of DLC. Borderlands 2 ups that number by quite a lot. The first DLC that was released for Borderlands 2 was actually a new player character by the name of Gage, so it probably makes sense to talk about these 2 characters now. Gage is called the Mechromancer and has an action skill that lets her summon a mech called Deathtrap. This mech stays out on the field and attacks enemies with both a melee attack and a ranged electric bolt. Gage has 3 skill trees: Best Friends Forever, Little Big Trouble, and Ordered Chaos. The first skill tree, Best Friends Forever, mainly deals with buffing the Death Trap skill and general support skills. The first tier allows your bullets to ricochet and increase health regen while your magazine is full. The second tier increases shield recharge rates and fire rates. It also has a midway skill called Buck Up, which allows Death Trap to increase your shields when deployed. The third tier increases maximum health for Gage and Death Trap and includes a skill called Upshot Robot that increases Death Trap's duration when killing an enemy, as well as giving him a melee damage bonus. The fourth tier includes damage reduction and includes an ability called Explosive Clap, which allows Death Trap to cause an explosion in front of himself when deployed. The fifth tier increases the cooldown rate of Death Trap, and the final skill, Sharing is Caring, gives a copy of your shield to Death Trap. The second skill tree, Little Big Trouble, mainly deals with elemental effects. The first tier increases elemental effect chance and grants shock resistance. The second tier causes an electric storm on killing enemies and contains a skill that allows Death Trap to fire a laser beam. The third tier gives a chance for your electric attacks to evolve into flame and increases the damage that elemental effects do. It also contains a skill called Shock and Awe, which causes an electrical explosion when reloading a gun. The fourth tier increases shock and electrocute damage, as well as giving Death Trap the ability to shoot an exploding orb. The fifth is called Interspersed Outburst and gives you a stack when not shooting enemies. These stacks are expended when dealing damage, and it reflects as slag on the enemy. The final skill, Make It Sparkle, allows you to charge Death Trap with elemental effects by shooting him with those effects. The final skill tree for Gage is called Ordered Chaos and mostly deals with the Anarchy skill. This skill is on the first tier and gives you stacks of Anarchy when you kill an enemy or fully empty your magazine. Every stack increases weapon damage, but your accuracy decreases. The second tier increases the amount of Anarchy stacks you can have. The third tier increases Death Trap's movement speed and increases the chance that you get extra Anarchy stacks. Discord allows you to reload early and get higher accuracy and fire rate, but you lose Anarchy stacks. The 4th tier allows you to gain more Anarchy stacks if you have none, and the 5th tier gives you a chance to have bullets ricochet. The final ability, with Claws, changes your melee attack when you have stacks of Anarchy. It deals damage based on the amount of Anarchy you have and gives you lifesteal. Deathtrap is essential to Gage's playstyle. It factors into just about every skill that she has, almost like Axton's turret. A lot of the skills are about turning Deathtrap into an absolute mechanical killing machine. Of course, Gage herself can be buffed as well, and the Anarchy skill tree is certainly a big part of that, but Gage and her mechanical friend are a pair. The second DLC character is named Krieg and was released in March of 2013. Krieg is a psycho character. He essentially looks like a bandit because he was experimented on by a doctor that subjected bandits to torture. His main action ability is Buzz Axe Rampage and actually functions pretty similarly to Brick's action skill from the first game. Krieg goes into a rage and does melee damage, regenerating health when killing enemies. His 3 skill trees are Bloodlust, Mania, and Hellborn. His first skill tree, Bloodlust, focuses on the Bloodlust mechanic. Dealing damage consecutively gives you stacks of Bloodlust. The first tier of the tree increases weapon swap damage and magazine size per Bloodlust stack. The second tier increases melee damage and assault rifle damage per Bloodlust stack. The third tier increases buffs on killing with grenades or explosion damage. Buzz Axe Bombardier allows the Buzz Axe to be explosive when thrown. The 4th tier increases decay buffer on Bloodlust buffs and the duration of Krieg's action skills. The 5th tier increases reload speed per Bloodlust level, and the final skill, Bloodsplosion, causes enemies to explode when killed. The overkill damage is added to the explosion as well as the Bloodlust stacks. The second skill tree, Mania, mostly deals with buffing health and melee combat. The first tier increases melee damage and max health. The second tier increases fire rate, and the third tier increases overkill damage returned as health. The Light the Fuse skill alters the way that Krieg's Fight for Your Life ability works. Instead of being downed, he pulls out a stick of dynamite and it detonates when the timer runs down. If you kill an enemy with it, you revive and get increased movement speed. The 4th tier allows instantly reviving teammates to down yourself and adds Salt the Wound stacks when your shield goes down, which increases melee and shotgun damage. The 5th tier increases melee damage, and the final skill for this tree, Release the Beast, alters Krieg's action skill. If activated when below a third of your health, you transform into a psycho mutant with extra melee damage and damage reduction. The final skill tree, Hellborn, mostly deals with elemental damage, mainly fire damage. The first tier increases burn damage and increases elemental effect chance, while also giving Krieg a chance to set himself on fire. The second tier increases weapon and melee damage and increases damage reduction when on fire. The third tier increases fire rate and magazine size when stacks of elemental elation are up, which are given out when elemental damage is dealt. The 4th tier changes Krieg's melee to a fire breath, and the 5th tier gives lifesteal for a portion of elemental damage done to enemies. The final skill, Raving Retribution, allows Krieg to spawn fireballs when damaged and also on fire. Krieg, while not even close to my favorite character in Borderlands 2, is one of the most interesting skills-wise. Setting himself on fire to do more damage is just wild, basically altering a lot of the mechanics in the game, like the Fight for Your Life ability or your melee attack is just nuts. It's exactly the kind of chaos that's expected from the Borderlands franchise. It just fits in really well with the world because it's risky, but also rewarding and fun. Both DLC characters are interesting, but I do prefer most of the main game characters to them, other than Axton. I would say he's probably on the bottom of my Borderlands 2 characters tier list, even though he's still pretty good. After the Necromancer was released, the first actual expansion content was called Captain Scarlet and Her Pirate's Booty. This was released on October 16th, 2012, and introduced a new area and storyline to the game. In Captain Scarlet, we are told a story by Marcus once again, this time about the Treasure of the Sands, an incredibly valuable supply so great that people kill for it. We head to the Oasis to look for this secret treasure and immediately save the town of Oasis from pirates. Once we do this, we're introduced to Shade, the sole resident of Oasis. He has slowly gone insane from being isolated for so long and has created fake residents of the town that he uses to talk to himself, essentially. He visually also happens to be a reference to Hunter S. Thompson, which sort of fits a lot of the dirt racing aesthetic that Borderlands has anyways. He luckily tells us to head to find Captain Scarlet, who might have more information on the treasure. He also helps us fix a sand skiff, the new vehicle for this expansion. We meet Captain Scarlet on her ship, who is pretty honest about the fact that she's going to double-cross us. We need to find the compass, which is comprised of 4 different pieces. This will give us the location of the treasure. She already has one piece, and we quickly get one from a roving Hyperion caravan. We can confront a bandit named Sandman in a cave who gives us the next piece of the compass. We can find a man named Herbert who has the last piece of the compass, but who is also obsessed with Captain Scarlet. He needs us to collect these echo recordings to give us the location of the device, which turns out to be right next to his house. We shoot the lock off the chest, but it destroys the compass piece, and he needs supplies to repair it. So he sends us out to a Hyperion facility to look for it. Once we defeat the robot boss here and bring it back, we give Herbert a gift from Scarlet, which turns out to be a bomb that kills him. We can then take the compass to Magni's lighthouse, where we place the completed artifact. The lighthouse then shines down onto the sands and Wormwater. Of course, Scarlet sends her crew after us and betrays the Vault Hunters. She's quickly eaten by a sandworm at the spot the lighthouse pointed to, and so are we. Scarlet's pet Rackhive was trapped in here as well, and we finally get to take her out. We then have to fight the Leviathan, and once we kill it, we can take the massive amounts of loot stored in this place. Scarlet isn't my favorite of the Borderlands 2 DLC, but it falls somewhere around the middle for me. Every DLC for this game is a step up from the first game's expansions because they have more effort put into the side quests and the story overall. They just have better environments to explore as well and are just overall higher effort across the board. But Scarlet doesn't quite have the story or narrative from me personally. Its main quests are a little bit cumbersome and the outcomes are a bit predictable. The second DLC campaign to be released for Borderlands 2 was Mr. Torg's Campaign of Carnage, and it was released on November 20th, 2012. The expansion takes place in the Badass Crater of Badassitude. Mr. Torg has decided to set up an arena in the crater because it's supposed to have a vault that will only open when a champion feeds it the blood of a coward. He's running a tournament there to find the #1 badass. We can sign up for the tournament when we get there, specifically with the assistance of another fighter named Piston. He agrees to sponsor us as long as we can prove ourselves in the arena, but even after we do that, he betrays us, using gas to knock the Vault Hunters out. After this, we need a new sponsor, so we head to the Beatdown, a bar where Pyro Pete has taken another sponsor hostage. That person turns out to be Moxie, who does agree to sponsor us. At this point, we need to train and start taking out each of the contestants on the leaderboard above us. One of the coolest parts about this expansion is that there's actually physical leaderboards around the area that accurately reflect where we're currently at. We're quickly set out to train with Tiny Tina, who has us steal cookies from inside the arena. She gets upset that they're oatmeal raisin cookies, and we destroy all of the vending machines. We're then sent after the third ranking contestant on the leaderboard, Motor Mama. She runs around the battle arena on a bike at the beginning, but we take her out pretty easily. After this, we can head to find the second ranking contestant, Flyboy. We can climb a massive tower that he sits atop, but once we reach the peak, Flyboy is killed by Piston before we can get to him. We can then finally challenge Piston for the #1 spot on the leaderboard, where he tries to cheat by using a machine called the Badassosaurus. We can destroy this, then fight Piston face to face, where we deal with him incredibly quickly. Once he's dead, we get a massive loot explosion that comes from the vault in the crater, and we can pick up the pieces that drop from the sky. I think that Torg is another DLC that falls in the middle in terms of Borderlands 2's expansions. It's pretty good though, so it probably lands just a bit above Captain Scarlet for me. I think the two expansions are probably pretty similar in terms of quality, but preference is going to determine where one or the other ranks. I think that the Torg Arena show really just feels like it makes sense for this new Borderlands world. In the weird Dune Mad Max wasteland that's being harvested by huge capitalist powers, I'd imagine that one of those would want to monetize the attention of the citizens of this world and other worlds as well. I also think Torg benefits from its structure. It's essentially just focused around these handful of bosses, and each boss heads a different area of the expansion. This means that the DLC gets chunked up and separated by these bosses, so it just feels like the pacing works really well. The third expansion to be released for Borderlands 2 was Sir Hammerlock's Big Game Hunt. It was released on January 15th, 2013. Hammerlock has set up a base camp on the continent of Agris and wants us to go find him. We're joining him on a hunt for some of the island's biggest game. After reclaiming the lodge, though, we're contacted by Professor Nakayama. He apparently poisoned the CEO of Atlas, but Hammerlock doesn't know who he is. He fixes up a boat, and in 50% held to Borderlands 2 tradition, we get a new vehicle for this expansion. With this boat, we have to find a giant scallion that Hammerlock wants us to kill. Once we defeat it, we have to quickly pivot and try to head after Nakayama, because he's pestering us over echo communication. He clearly wants to be the big bad of this expansion, but Hammerlock just wants to hunt. Unfortunately, before he can hunt in peace, we have to deal with him. Nakayama appears to be controlling the enemies in this island, which he calls savages, which is kind of insane. He reveals on the way to the ship that he's planning to clone Handsome Jack with the material that he gathered from a Hyperion vessel. Once we get to the main village, we find Claptrap being worshipped by a group of people. They quickly turn against him, and we protect our robot friend once again. He tells us where the lab is so we can destroy the Handsome Jack DNA that Nakayama has. We can head through the lab and get rid of the samples that Nakayama has collected. Once we do this, though, he sicks one of his experiments on us. It's a massive beast called Wound Spike that has Handsome Jack's face. Nakayama unfortunately has one last sample piece of DNA on his ship, so we have to seek him out and kill him. We eventually reach Nakayama's ship and have to face off against his final creation, Jackenstein. Once we destroy it, Nakayama appears with one final resistance against us, though before he can launch it, he dies by falling down the stairs. It's actually one of the funnier bits in the game and is probably the only redeeming part about this DLC. There's a large room in the next area that we can loot, and other than endgame activities, Big Game Hunt is basically over. This is easily the worst of the 4 main DLCs for Borderlands 2. First of all, the story is really just nothing compared to the others. Nakayama is kind of funny in a fourth wall breaking way, but not enough to base the entire structure of the expansion around him. The route that we take through the narrative is also just so simple. We take out a bug, destroy some DNA samples, kill Nakayama, that's it. Where Big Hunt gets really bad, though, is the level design and enemies. Most of the fighting takes place on these platforms hanging far above landscapes. Narrow walkways with small barricades barely prevent us from careening to our death. This wouldn't be such a problem, but half of the enemies in this expansion have the ability to throw us off of these platforms. The new enemy types, quote-unquote savages, are also just terrible. There's a main leader enemy type that has a large mask on that we can't shoot through. It acts as a shield, and they come in a variety of different styles. The flame leaders will launch fire at us. The slag ones will launch slag, etc. They also power up and heal themselves and their surrounding enemies, though. They're just super annoying to deal with, and they are so common. You'll at least be fighting 50 to 100 throughout a normal run of the DLC. Big Hunt also just didn't have the aesthetic appeal for me. While I like Hammerlock, I'm not interested enough in him to have a whole expansion featured around him. This one just wasn't for me. The final base expansion released for Borderlands 2, aside from the one we'll talk about shortly, is Tiny Tina's Assault on Dragon Keep. It was released on June 25th, 2013. Tiny Tina's Assault on Dragon Keep is the best DLC out of the 4, the best DLC for the entire game, and probably the best DLC the franchise has ever produced. It's the ultimate example of how to do a DLC well. It balances humor and complex themes, it further characterizes a lot of the core people in the game, and makes for a great time overall. The DLC begins as Tiny Tina has invited Mordecai, Brick, and Lilith over to play what is essentially Dungeons and Dragons, with Tina serving as the DM. None of the Crimson Raiders are particularly excited to be playing this game with Tina, but they're mostly willing. Tina, however, wants to wait for their fourth to arrive, Roland. Lilith has to remind Tina that Roland isn't coming, but she doesn't listen. We then play the characters that the Crimson Raiders are playing in this tabletop role-playing game, which is just a fantastic idea. This concept is often referenced in the game by using the dynamic objective system. The narration that's happening at the table is constantly piped into the echo communicators, sometimes changing the world in front of ours. This happens pretty early because Tina creates a dragon boss that is far too powerful for the group to take on at the very beginning of the campaign. As the players complain, she changes it into a far more manageable foe. We then head to Flame Rock Refuge, where the word around town is that the queen has gone missing. We can speak to Eleanor, who is actually just Ellie. Apparently the queen was cursed and she was headed to the forest to undo it. A man named Davlin is supposed to take us into the forest, but Torg calls because he wants to be in the game and fucks the entire thing up. He gives us a quest to take down the blimps in town and then sends us to the tavern to fight people. He tries to get us to blow up the ocean, but Lilith complains enough that Torg is banished to the stocks. In the forest, we follow the queen's trail and head towards some ruins. This leads to the Immortal Woods, where the path continues. We're sent to find the White Knight to help us gain entrance into the next facility. This knight turns out to be Roland, to which the players once again protest and try to convince Tina that Roland isn't coming. Roland gets us access to the tree, and once we give a blood fruit to Devlin, he transforms, revealing the fact that he was the handsome sorcerer the entire time. We end up defeating some ghost knights and head into the nearby dwarven mine. We need to find them because they are integral to the anti-sorcerer resistance. Unfortunately, Brick rolls highest, so he gets to talk to the dwarves and forces us to punch Ragnar in the face. This immediately aggravates them and they become our enemies. So then our new objective is to get out of the mines. We find Claptrap nearby, who is a wizard in this world. He has to help us unlock the dwarven doors that leave the mines. We need to find the dwarven passphrase, which turns out to be fart. We get a rematch against the dragon since we're now high level enough to defeat it. We get trapped in Dragon Keep by the sorcerer and have to make our way to the top. We find a prisoner, which turns out to be Angel, but in this world she's bad and we have a boss fight against her. Heading to the top of the keep, we have to fight the handsome sorcerer. Once he's gone, Tina tells the party that Roland arrived to celebrate, but once again they're clearly very uncomfortable. As they try to get her to accept Roland's death, she reveals that she knew all along, but this was a story that she made, and she wanted to change the ending. The group relents and lets her tell the story. Roland is then saved by Bloodwing just before getting hit with the sorcerer's spell. The group then saves the queen, who turns out to be Butt Stallion. We feed her some iridium and she brings the light back into the world. The Crimson Raiders praise Tina on the game before they all leave to take on another mission. We then see a brief scene as Tina hugs Roland's statue, a memorial for him, and bids him a final goodbye. Assault on Dragon Keep is great in a variety of ways, but the first way is how it balances the humor and emotional impact of Borderlands. This franchise is at its best when it manages to inject just enough emotional storytelling to offset the constant barrage of humor that's coming at us. This expansion does that incredibly well. Throughout the entire game, Tina is constantly either bringing Roland into the game or stopping it so they can wait for him to show up. The reveal at the end is this cutting moment for Tina's character. She's just a child that's forced to take care of herself in this wasteland. She's been forced to adapt to the weird, grotesque, and absurd world that Pandora is, and she has adapted well. But that doesn't mean that she's healthy. She can't accept Roland's death, at least not yet. She wants some way to gain agency over the world, to feel like she has control. And this ends up being an incredible love letter to not just TTRPGs, but games in general. Games can be a wonderful experience that let you process emotions. They can be an outlet for those emotions, or a place for you to gain some type of control where you feel like you have none. For this concept to be expressed in a fucking Borderlands 2 DLC of all places is absolutely insane, but it's very well done. On top of that, this game clearly has all of the hallmarks of being written by people who know TTRPGs. As someone who has played them often for the past decade or so, mostly DMing and forcing my friends to play D&D, I know how fun and magical the tabletop space can be, how collaborative, how frustrating, and how tense it can get. Tiny Tina manages to reference a lot of different D&D cliches and jokes, but it also just does a great job reflecting the different archetypes and people that will sit at a table, and how often people that aren't interested at the beginning become the most interested. The DLC also has probably one of my favorite side quests in the entire game. Claptrap the wizard wants to be more wizard-like, so he sends us on some quests to get him a beard, to get him a wand, and eventually we help him cast a massive and powerful spell. All this spell does is summon some broom minions, ones that quickly turn on us. The brooms get more and more powerful as Claptrap tries to stop the spell, and we have to keep fighting them off before he eventually just gives up on sorcery altogether. I also think that Assault on Dragon Keep has some of the best comedy in Borderlands 2. It constantly got chuckles out of me at different points. Not every joke, but far more of them did than in the base game or the first entry. This expansion is just the absolute peak for the series so far, and honestly might be one of my favorite DLCs ever made. Tiny Tina would be the last of the 4 base expansions for Borderlands 2, but after this, Gearbox would start releasing Headhunter packs. There were 5 of these in total, and instead of being entire expansions, they were just single missions with a boss at the end and maybe a couple side quests. The first, TK Baja's Bloody Harvest, was seasonal and Halloween themed. Zombie TK Baja wants us to take out the Pumpkin Kingpin, a massive pumpkin-headed boss that grows out of a garden. The Horrible Hunger of the Ravenous Wattle Gobbler takes place at one of Torg's other shows. The Wattle Gobbler is a massive beast that was designed to win every battle that it fights on his show. It's invulnerable, but if we poison it, we can kill it. Torg helps us do this, mostly because he thinks it'll be cool, but also because he loves causing trouble. Eventually, Torg's president contacts us, reprimanding Torg because they were building up Wattle Gobbler so that Torg could get the kill on it someday, but he doesn't care and lets us kill it. We can also talk to Torg's grandma for some side quests where she tells us some incredibly boring and very long stories. The third Headhunter mission is how Marcus saved Mercenary Day, and it takes place in Frostbottom, where the citizens are celebrating Mercenary Day, or they were until a snowman named Mr. Tinder Snowflake froze the town and stole their gun shipment. Marcus plans to steal the shipment as well, but feels bad and gives the town their guns after we defeat the boss. Bad Moxie and the Wedding Day Massacre is the fourth Headhunter mission. Moxie wants us to oversee a wedding that's meant to end the Hodunk-Zafford feud. Marrying one from each family to each other should stop them from constantly fighting. Unfortunately, the two are not getting along. We can mix and give them a love potion, but it turns out they're both Goliaths and they become enraged after taking their helmets off, so we have to kill them. The two families end up joining forces in the end only because we caused a slaughter at the wedding. The final Headhunter mission is Sir Hammerlock versus the son of Cromermax. Hammerlock has been kidnapped after inviting the Vault Hunters to a vacation on Wham Bam Island. We have to eventually rescue him from the invincible son of Cromermax the Invincible, the son of the raid boss from the first game. The Headhunter packs are all around just fine. They were $3 a piece on release, which was probably a slightly fair price for what content you're getting, but I would definitely put all of the expansions above these Headhunter missions. They're good for maybe an hour of playtime, but not much more. The one thing that I haven't talked about is the fact that Borderlands 2 actually had a 5th DLC expansion, one that didn't release until 2019, over 5 years after the last DLC for the game had released. This expansion was meant to bridge the gap between Borderlands 2 and 3. This DLC does actually spoil some stuff from Tales from the Borderlands because that released before this game. So if you don't want spoilers, skip to the next section. We will talk about Tales from the Borderlands in a later video, but for now, just be wary. At the beginning of the fight for Sanctuary, the Crimson Raiders are in a precarious position. Pandora is in a relative state of peace, but this means that people are rejecting the Crimson Raiders because they don't need them anymore. Sanctuary is falling apart, and the crew is having trouble deciphering the map that they found at the end of Borderlands 2. On top of that, Lilith is resistant to taking the leadership role among this group. Just as all of this is being addressed, invading ships arrive, launching fire and soldiers on Sanctuary. A group begins throwing grenades full of some sort of serum that infects the civilians with plants. Lilith manages to teleport the group out of Sanctuary, but a mysterious villain has gained control of the vault key. He pretty quickly contacts us, informing the group that his name is Commander Hector, and he is a representative of the new Pandoran army. He's come here to take control of the planet. He's going to use that plant gas all over Pandora. We can secure a camp and meet a bandit called Vaughn. Fortunately, he's too cowardly to fight us and decides to help. Lilith can't teleport into Sanctuary, so we need to develop some sort of cure for the gas. We end up defending the Backburner, the new temporary base we've established. Mordecai gets in trouble, so we have to go save him. We find a new bird that Mordecai has trained named Talon. He was actually referenced in the Hammerlock Headhunter mission and also in the credits of Borderlands 2. Talon leads us to Mordecai where we save his life. He's been infected though, so we have to get that cure quick. We can head into the doll mine to try and get to Cassius, a scientist that says he can help us, but only after getting a weapon that can blow the doors open. We have to enter the wreckage of the Hyperion space station Helios and get its weapons ready to fire. We get this working with the assistance of Tiny Tina and Lilith, and at one point we fight the Uranus bot, a massive mech in the wreckage. One thing I have to commend this DLC for is just how well it recognizes the previous work done in the Tiny Tina DLC. That expansion greatly progresses her character, and she's now a little more self-aware. That is written into her dialogue, and you can actually tell. You can feel it in the things she says. When she doubts herself or second guesses what she's saying. After launching the cannon, we have to take a blood sample from Mordecai so Cassius can create the cure. We can get to Cassius's lab by heading through the mine, but when we get there, Mordecai's blood isn't enough. He's already infected and he requests that we kill him to obtain the sample of blood that we need. Once we take the antidote, we can safely walk through any areas with the plant gas. This makes traversal a lot easier because earlier in the game, the gas can heavily damage us. With the antidote, we can launch our assault on Sanctuary. This means invading the city and having a final boss battle with Hector. He's a massive plant boss with tentacles sprouting out in every direction. He'll summon a ton of enemies to fight us throughout the battle, but with some persistence we can eventually take him down. We can then gather some iridium for Lilith from Crazy Earl's shop. Hector has entwined the map inside of himself. He claims that if we destroy him, the map is destroyed as well. Lilith teleports us out of there and is forced to destroy Sanctuary to take Hector out. Even though the map is destroyed, Lilith is still determined to find the vaults out in space. She gives a rousing speech telling the crew to go find new badasses for their crew. Lilith reveals that as soon as she finds the vault map, she's off this planet. The post-credits sequence reveals that the vault map is still out there somewhere in the wasteland. Fight for Sanctuary is a pretty great DLC, mostly because it's a reflective love letter for Borderlands 2 itself. It's closing out an era of the games, saying goodbye to it, and moving into a new one. There's a lot of pretty great side quests in Fight for Sanctuary, like a quest where you find out that Marcus and Crazy Earl are forced to live together after Sanctuary was taken over. We can get them some food, but eventually Marcus leaves because he can't handle it anymore. There are some quests where we try to get new initiates for Vaughn to start his own bandit crew, but it goes terribly wrong every time. But the best side quest in this expansion is probably the one from Moxie. Scooter was actually Moxie's son, a fact that was dropped in one of the first game's DLC, but unfortunately Scooter dies valiantly during the events of Tales from the Borderlands. Moxie gives us an echo recorder that Scooter left behind, his last will and testament that we have to exact. Of course, he wants his nudie magazine collection dispersed, but he also wants a large flaming memorial that we can do a sick jump over. Ellie sets this up with a large billboard that says, "See you, Space Cowboy." It's another touching moment for Borderlands in a sea of fart jokes, but it really works to characterize these people and the things they've lost. Roland, Bloodwing, Scooter, these are all real things and people that the characters have given up, that they've sacrificed in the interest of keeping Pandora safe. A never-ending quest that doesn't always seem to work out. Overall, it's a good DLC. I would honestly put it second only to Tiny Tina in the list overall. But of course, as you know, Borderlands doesn't even end at the DLC. There's far more to be done even after that. Endgame is where Borderlands truly begins, and that wasn't entirely true in the first game. There was some extra stuff to do, but it wasn't a plethora of content. Borderlands 2 is the exact opposite. Beating the main game really means things have just begun. In Borderlands 1, after beating the game, we could start playthrough 2. This was a sort of new game plus for the time. We would start it at the same level with all the upgrades and equipment, but enemies would be scaled up a bit higher, allowing us to more effectively reach level cap. In Borderlands 2, though, there are two separate New Game Plus modes to achieve. The first one, unlocked upon beating the game, is True Vault Hunter mode. This is another New Game Plus essentially. Everything transfers over and you start the game from the beginning, but the difficulty is greatly increased. Basic enemies now have a chance to become stronger variants of those enemies with different names. Badass varieties of enemies are far more common and appear a lot. Elemental effects and resistances play a much bigger part. This means that if you hit an enemy who is resistant to fire damage with fire damage, you barely do anything at all. Enemies have a lot more health, they scale higher, you get more experience from missions, and of course, you get a lot better loot. But there's another mode that's even further past True Vault Hunter mode. This is Ultimate Vault Hunter mode, and it was added in a DLC after the release of the main game. This can only be unlocked by completing the story on True Vault Hunter mode first. There are a ton of additional modifiers here, but once again, enemies scale even further and drop much better loot. One thing that I haven't really talked about in Borderlands 2, mostly because it doesn't really apply to this entry until Endgame, is Slag. Slag is an incredibly important elemental effect. Using a slag weapon on enemies gives them an effect for 8 seconds that increases damage by 100%. This is absolutely essential on both True Vault Hunter mode and Ultimate Vault Hunter mode. Slagging enemies becomes so important because their health is increased so much that you almost have to use slag to take them out. This is probably one of the only downsides of Borderlands 2's endgame, that it's so reliant on slag. It railroads your options just a bit and makes things a little more linear than I'd like them. Of course, you still have the choice of how to apply slag, and everything else in your build is up to you, but this one thing isn't really your choice. So what's the point of Endgame? Why keep playing once you've completed all the DLC and the main quests? Well, to get stronger, of course, to get more loot, to level up, to optimize our builds, but also to defeat the raid bosses that the game holds. The first Borderlands game only had one raid boss, Cromarax, and while that was sufficient to satiate the players of that entry, the sequel needed to up the score quite a bit. The main game this time around includes 2 raid bosses, Terramorphous the Invincible and Vormervorus the Invincible. Both of these bosses are level 52 in the base game and True Vault Hunter versions, but can get up to level 92 or 93 in Ultimate Vault Hunter. In the Captain Scarlet DLC, we can get access to 2 raid bosses, Hyperius the Invincible and Master Guy the Invincible. In Torg's Campaign of Carnage, we can take on Pete the Invincible, and in Hammerlock's Hunt, we can fight Vorasidius and Dexidius. Tiny Tina's DLC allows us to fight the ancient dragons of destruction, and the Fight for Sanctuary lets us fight Hatterax. There are technically 10 total raid bosses in the game, including the Son of Cromarax. Most of these bosses require heavy strategy and are made far easier by teaming up with other people to fight them. They also require Iridium to start fighting them in the first place. You have to pay an Iridium fee to access the boss fight, so even getting in costs something. This gives Iridium another use outside of just upgrading your storage space. And everything just becomes a bit harder in the endgame modes. Positioning is far more important when dealing with certain enemy types. Elemental damage is important when you're thinking about resistances. Your build becomes incredibly important when something isn't working. You have to fine-tune your gear and your skills to ensure that you can get past the next challenge in front of you. It's technically the same game, but the perspective through which you view it has changed. The same content is there, but it might as well be something entirely new. In general, Borderlands 2 creates what the franchise's endgame is known for, a nearly endless loop where you can satisfyingly engage with the game's systems over and over again. There's a near endless supply of this game for the people who want it. It's incredibly easy to put over 1,000 hours into Borderlands 2, especially when you consider trying to complete the overpower ranks in Ultimate Vault Hunter mode. Even if you've done it once, you can still do it all again with other characters, trying out new builds with different classes. You can play the game again with friends and level up new characters specifically for a group. There's a reason that Borderlands 2 is one of those games that seemingly everyone has in their Steam library. It sucks you in like a whirlpool. You can try and fight against its drift, but ultimately, it's a losing battle. It's not a matter of if, but when you get sucked in. Borderlands 2 is one of those landmark games. It takes up a massive space in video game history. It did change the market, but it also left an odd stain on the franchise that, in hindsight, people might view as a misstep. The game leans far further into the humor than the other entries, and because of the sins of the son, Borderlands 2 is blamed. But I think Borderlands 2 was an inevitable and reasonable response to the first game's success. It did everything that Borderlands did, but just took it far further. The systems were refined, gameplay was tuned to feel and play better. There are more skills, more classes, larger areas, more weapons, more rarities, more gear, more everything. Skills are more impactful, classes are more unique, gear packs more of a punch, everything is just more. So it only stands to reason that Borderlands 2 would turn the humor up a few notches as well. After all, that was part of the initial appeal of the first game anyways. The style of Borderlands has always contained this jokey, cartoonish tone. Sure, the first game was a bit darker, but Borderlands 2 contains its fair share of serious moments. And I think the game's greatest strength in the end is its sense of balance. It knows when to cut in and provide some stakes, and when to sit back and let the lighthearted moments play out. Those comedy moments that come in abundance are what personalize the characters in the first place. So when Bloodwing or Roland die, it makes the death all the more impactful because we've spent so much time with them. Or when Tina breaks down and reveals the core of her motivation for playing this game that she's developed. It makes you realize that this character isn't just some goofy, explosion-focused teenage girl. She's an actual teenage girl with feelings and emotions that can't be catered to in a wasteland where the biggest problem is the end of the world. There's a darkness and a seriousness there, a small through line that's present in Borderlands 2. One criticism that I will uphold is the fact that the serious doesn't play with these themes enough. I'm not saying that the franchise should be all doom and gloom, because then it wouldn't be Borderlands, but I feel like there's so much commentary baked into the Borderlands games that it only vaguely brushes past. But the core of Borderlands as a series is Borderlands 2. It's most present in this game. Though I haven't yet explored the future entries in the series, I can say that I think this is what most people associate the franchise with at this point. This strange place in time, a capsule where the gameplay was just right and the story struck a balance that managed to resonate. Borderlands 2 got great reviews on release. It currently has a 91 on Metacritic for the PS3 version of the game. Fan reception was fantastic, making that game even more of a success than the first entry, showing that doubling down paid off handedly for Gearbox. It was the most pre-ordered game in 2K's history at the time. It was the biggest launch for a game in the UK in the year of its release, and by 2015 they had sold more than 12 million copies. It was clear that Borderlands was not just a fluke at this point, and Gearbox was ready to capitalize further, for better or for worse. But we'll talk about that next time. Bye, Dad. Thanks so much for watching this video. I'm really glad that people are interested in this series. I was kind of worried people wouldn't watch a series on Borderlands, which is why I was hesitant to start it, but I was just so interested in exploring these games. I've got more Borderlands videos coming up. I'm going to cover the whole series. But if you enjoy the video, consider supporting on the Patreon and becoming a part of this list of fantastic people right here, or just like and subscribe if that's more your style. Thanks again for watching. Bye, Dad.